The poet George Barker has, over many years, attracted me and repelled me alternatively. Barker's collected poems, published by Faber, is somewhere between 800 and 900 pages. But I think there are only, realistically, 3 poems that are entirely successful. And in his marvellous anthology, The Tenth Muse, Anthony Astbury includes these 3 poems. I've spoken to Astbury, who was a lovely man, and he said Barker was so irascible that only he, Anthony Astbury, is the only person Barker didn't manage to fall out with at some time in his long life. Barker was very fortunate in that early in his career he was taken up by T.S. Eliot, and Eliot said to him that it was unlikely he would be recognised in his lifetime, and possibly never. I think he is a very difficult poet to judge because his early work was incredibly overwritten. It was in the style of the poets of the 30s known as the Apocalypse. When I say the 30s, it was more probably about 1940, 41, 42. And their work is largely unread, and justifiably so, because it is unreadable. But in these 3 poems there is a greatness there. Firstly, to my mother. Most near, most dear, most loved and most far, under the window where I often found her, sitting as huge as Asia, seismic with laughter, gin and chicken helpless in her Irish hand, irresistible as Rabelais, but most tender for the lame dogs and hurt birds that surround her. She is a procession no one can follow, but be like a little dog following a brass band. She will not glance up at the bomber, or condescend to drop her gin and scuttle to a cellar, but lean on the mahogany table like a mountain, whom only faith can move. And so I send, oh, all my faith and all my love to tell her that she will move from morning into morning. His poem, Turn on Your Side and Bear the Day to Me, is a wonderfully powerful love poem. Turn on your side and bear the day to me, beloved, sceptre struck, immured in the glass wall of sleep. Slowly uncloud the borealis of your eye, and show your iceberg secrets, your midnight prizes, to the green-eyed world and to me. Sin coils upward into thin air. When you awaken, and again morning announces amnesty over the serpent-kingdomed bed, your mother watched with as a dove and eye the unforgivable night sigh backward into innocence. When you set a bright monument in our amorous sea, look down, Undine, on the trident that struck suns from the rock of vanity. Turn in the world, sceptre-struck, spellbound, beloved, turn in the world and bear the day to me. His poem, which is probably, I think, his best poem, which is to the memory of his father, is called At Thurgarton Church. At Thurgarton Church, the sun burns the winter clouds over the gaunt Danish stone and thatch reeds that cover the barest chapel I know. I could compare it with the Norse longboats that bore burning the body forth in honour from the shore, of great fjords long ago. The sky is red and cold overhead, and 3 small sturdy trees keep a hold on the world and the stone wall that encloses the dead below. I enter and find I stand in a great barn, bleak and bare, like ice the winter ghosts, and the white walls gleam and flare, and flame as the sun drops low. And I see then that slowly the December day has gone. I stand in the silence, not wholly believing I am alone. Somehow I cannot go. Then a small wind rose, and the trees began to crackle and stir. And I watched the moon by degrees ascend in the window till her light cut a wing in the shadow. I thought, the house of the dead. The dead moon inherits it, and I seem in a sense to have died as I rise from where I sit and out into darkness go. I know that as I leave I shall pass where Thurgarton's dead lie, at those old stones in the grass under the cold moon's eye. I see the old bones glow. No, they do not sleep here in the long holy night of the serene soul, but keep here a dark tenancy and the right of rising up to go. Here the owl and soul shriek with the voice of the dead as they turn on the polar spit and burn without hope, and seek without hope the holy home below. Yet to them the mole and mouse bring a wreath and a breath of the flowering leaves of the soul, and it is from the tree of death the leaves of life grow. The rain, the sometime summer rain on a memory of roses, will fall lightly and come among them as it erases summers so long ago, and the voices of those once so much loved will flitter over the nettle rows of graves, and the holly tree twitter like friends they used to know. And not far away the icy and paralysed stream has found it also. That day the flesh became glass and a dream with nowhere to go. Haunting the December fields, their bitter lives entreat us to remember the lost spirit that grieves over these fields like a scarecrow, that grieves all over it ever did, and all not done, and grieves over its cross-purposed lot to know and not to know. The masterless dog sits outside the church door with dereliction haunting its heart that hankers for the hand that loved it so. Not in a small grave outside the stone wall will the love that it gave ever be returned, not for all time or tracks in the snow. More mourn the death of the dog than our bones ever shall receive from the hand of God, this bone again, or all that high hand could bestow. As I stand by the porch, I believe that no one has heard here in Thurgarton church a single veritable word, save the unspoken no, the godfathered negative that responds to our mistaken, incredulous and heartbroken desire, above all to live as though things were not so. Desire to live as though the two-footed clay stood up, proud never to know the tempest that raged in the cup under a rainbow. Desire above all to live as though the soul was stone, believing we cannot give or love, since we are alone and always will be so. The heart-broken desire to live as though no light ever set the seas on fire, and no sun burned at night, or mercy walked to and fro. The proud flesh cries, I am not caught up in the great cloud of my unknowing, but that proud flesh has endowed us with the cloud we know. To this the unspoken no of the dead God responds, and then the whirlwinds blow over all things and beyond, and the dead mop and mow. And there In the livid dust and bones of death we search, until we find, as we must outside Thurgarton church, only wild grasses blow. I hear the old bone in me cry, and the dying spirit call, I have forfeited all, and once and for all must die, and this is all that I know. For now, in a wild way, we know that justice is served, and that we die in the clay we dread, desired and deserved, awaiting no judgment day. I think those 3 poems represent Barker at his absolute best. Lyrical, passionate, obsessed with writing great poetry. And it is very sad that someone who devoted their entire lives to writing poetry and fathering, I believe, 15 children by 3 different mothers, was unable to produce more work at that enormously powerful level. Too many of his poems are virtually impossible to understand. I'll read a few lines from Roman poem 3. There was this empty birdcage in the garden, and in it, to amuse myself, I had hung pseudo-oriental birds constructed of glass and tin bits and paper that squeaked sadly as the wind sometimes disturbed them. This does not reach the kind of power that Barker was capable of in his best work. If you look at his work, you will see some of it, in a sense, could have been written by Dylan Thomas, and some of it could have been written by Henry Treece, the leader of the apocalyptic movement. And it's very sad because in some of his poems, very long poems, you will find a phrase or a couplet of great power and images of soaring beauty, but the rest of the poem somehow never gets to that level. But in his poem at Thurgarton Church, they get an enormous rhythm and a simplicity, and somehow he pulls it off. Sadly, very few of his poems were ever recorded by George Barker, and I have heard a recording of Barker reading, and he is, I would say this, and I'm not alone in saying this, an appalling reader of his own work. Probably the worst poet to ever have read his own work, and this is not something I alone share. A close friend of his, I think it wasn't, I'm not quite sure which of his friends, he had a great many friends in the literary world, but one of his friends said, for Christ's sake, read with some passion, the passion's in the poetry, why don't you actually read that passion in the poetry? But he never actually did this. He read in a very quiet way, in a very drab way, as though he was reading from the daily newspaper. And this is greatly sad, and sometimes poets don't read marvellously, but they read with a great interest. Yeats is a particular example of this. But sadly, Barker's readings are a huge disappointment, and it would be better having been read by Dylan Thomas. But I try my best to get some of my own passion for Barker, the passion that is there in the work, particularly in those 3 stunningly great poems.